Ever wonder what makes biology, like, really different from just physics and chemistry all mashed together?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to find out.
Let's do it.
In this deep dive, we're tackling the ideas behind the experiments.
Right.
We've got this analysis of Philosophy of Experimental Biology by Marcel Weber.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it's got some real whoa moments.
It really makes you think about biology, differently. It's not just like the stuff itself, but the how and the why.
You're right. One of the first things that really struck me was this whole reductionism thing,
Uh-huh.
like breaking things down to teeny tiny bits to figure out the whole shebang.
Yeah.
It's like taking apart a clock, right, to see how it ticks.
Right.
But this analysis makes it clear that in biology, it's not quite that simple.
No, not at all. Weber, he argues that while biology obviously uses reductionism, it doesn't mean that all those theories, they can be like perfectly reduced to just physics and chemistry.
So it's not enough to just know the parts, it's how they fit together, right?
Exactly. Weber, he uses this term. It's a mouthful, explanatory heteronomy.
Whoa.
But think of it like baking.
Okay.
You could know, like, every single chemical bit of flour, sugar, eggs.
Right.
But that wouldn't tell you how to bake a cake.
Yeah.
You need the recipe.
Right.
That specific combo, how it all interacts. That's what biology brings, you see. It's got its own rules, its own explanations.
That makes total sense. Knowing the ingredients is one thing, but that recipe, the way it all comes together, that's where the magic is.
Yes.
So biology isn't just applied physics and chemistry. It's got its own unique way of looking at life.
Precisely. And speaking of looking at things, have you ever wondered how scientists actually make discoveries? It's not always a big eureka moment, is it?
Definitely not. It's not like they're tripping over groundbreaking stuff every day in the lab.
Right.
Or maybe they are and they're not telling us.
Well, I can't speak for every scientist.
True.
But this analysis, it gets into that process of discovery. And it's actually way more methodical and honestly exciting than just, stumbling onto something random.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Think of scientists like, detectives.
Ooh, okay.
They're always observing, gathering clues, looking for patterns, trying to crack the case.
So less about luck, more about careful planning, execution.
Exactly. And that process, the scientific method, it's always changing, always getting sharper with each new thing they figure out. That's what makes it so dynamic, always pushing those boundaries of what we know.
It's like building a puzzle, but every piece you fit in, you realize the puzzle is even bigger and more complex than you first thought.
What a great way to put it. And speaking of complex, let's talk about something that might just blow your mind. Scientific realism.
Okay, you've got my attention. Hit me with it.
Have you ever wondered, like really wondered, if the things biologists study like genes, do they actually exist? Or are they just like really useful concepts we've made up to make sense of everything?
Yeah. Whoa. Now that is a deep thought. Are we about to go down a rabbit hole of, like, existential biology here?
Well, maybe not a rabbit hole exactly,
Okay.
but we are going to dive headfirst into this whole debate about the nature of reality itself. And it all starts with a simple question. Do these biological things, do they have a reality outside of our own minds? Or are they just like convenient little stories we tell ourselves?
Hold on to your hats, folks. This is where things get really interesting. All right, so we're talking about scientific realism. Do things like genes actually exist, or are they just, like you said, really handy concepts we use in biology? It's kind of mind-blowing to think about.
It really makes you think about, the foundation of scientific knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy question. Philosophers have been going back and forth on this forever.
So we've got the realists on one side, right? The ones who say, yep, genes are as real as the nose on your face. What's their argument exactly?
Basically, they say that the fact that science is so good at explaining and predicting the natural world, well, that's pretty strong evidence that our best scientific theories are actually true.
Okay.
And if those theories say genes exist, well, then genes probably exist.
It's kind of hard to argue with success, right? I mean, think about all the amazing progress we've made in medicine because we understand genes.
Exactly. Think about it. If this idea, this gene thing, helps us understand how traits get passed down, how to predict them, even develop new treatments, it's got to be more than just a convenient fiction, don't you think?
That makes sense. But what about the other side? What do the skeptics say about all this?
They say, hold on, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
They say, just because we have a good understanding right now doesn't mean we've got it all figured out.
Right.
They argue that we shouldn't be so quick to assume that our current understanding of science, even something like genes, is the be-all and end-all.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. After all, if we look back at the history of science, we've been wrong about a lot of things.
Precisely. Remember when everyone thought the Earth was flat?
Right?
Or that diseases were caused by bad smells? Science has come a long way.
For sure.
And the skeptics, they remind us to stay humble, to acknowledge that we don't know everything. They'd say something like, genes are definitely useful concepts, but let's not get carried away and mistake them for absolute truths.
So it's like saying, hey, we've got a pretty good grasp on genes right now, but who knows what the future holds?
Exactly. They're emphasizing that scientific discovery never stops. It's always open to being revised, refined, as we learn more.
It's like that saying, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting, right? It's not about having all the answers, but about being okay with the mystery and always trying to understand more.
It's about the journey, not just the destination. But you know me, I always like to bring things back down to earth. So we've explored this debate about scientific realism. But why does it matter for the average person? What's a takeaway for someone who isn't a scientist or a philosopher?
That's a great question. I think it comes down to this. Understanding the philosophy behind science makes you a more informed and discerning thinker.
Can you give me an example? How does this genes might be real, they might not be thing affect my everyday life?
Okay, let's say you're reading an article about a new genetic test.
Okay.
And this test says it can predict your risk of getting a certain disease.
Right.
Knowing about these debates around scientific realism can help you ask those critical questions.
Like, hold on, is this test actually accurate, or is this based on solid science, or is this still, like, up in the air?
Exactly. You can approach these claims with, a healthy dose of skepticism, some critical thinking. You're not just blindly accepting everything you read. You're digging deeper, looking at things from different angles, and forming your own informed opinions.
So it's like having a built-in BS detector for all the scientific claims we see every day.
Precisely. And in today's world where we are just bombarded with information from all sides, that kind of critical thinking, that's more valuable than ever.
That's so important, especially these days. But, we've been talking about genes as these abstract ideas. Earlier, you mentioned some really cool historical examples from genetics that, really bring this to life. Got any stories for us?
Oh, absolutely. Let's go back in time, about 100 years to the early 1900s.
Okay.
This was before scientists knew that DNA was the thing that actually carried genetic information.
Wow.
They knew genes existed, but they didn't know where they were, what they looked like.
That's wild to think about. I mean, we just take DNA for granted now, so how'd they even start to figure it out?
Enter the humble fruit fly.
Okay.
Scientists, particularly this guy Thomas Hunt Morgan, they started working with fruit flies, Drosophila melanogaster, to study heredity.
Fruit flies, those little things that are always buzzing around my bananas.
The very same. And those little guys, they were actually key to some of the biggest breakthroughs in genetics. Morgan and his team, they were breeding thousands of these flies, super carefully tracking how traits got passed down from one generation to the next.
What were they looking for exactly in these flies?
Mutations, unexpected changes in traits that were passed down. Imagine a fruit fly, right? But instead of the normal red eyes, it's got white eyes.
Okay, yeah.
Or weird wings. Those were clues.
So by studying these mutations, these weird flies, they could trace those traits back to specific genes, even though they couldn't actually see the genes themselves.
Exactly. Morgan's team, they found these mutations weren't just random. They were linked to specific spots on the chromosomes. Those thread-like things inside cells.
Yeah.
This was huge. It finally gave scientists a physical location for these mysterious genes they'd been studying.
Like they could finally pinpoint on a map, gene for eye color, right here, and all that, just from fruit flies.
Amazing, right? Just goes to show, even the tiniest creatures can lead to these giant leaps forward in science.
It really makes you appreciate the power of just asking questions,
It really does. And it loops back to what we were talking about before, scientific realism, the nature of discovery. These scientists were wrestling with huge questions about heredity. And through careful observation, experimentation, they revealed a deeper layer of, biological reality.
And that journey of discovery, it's still going on today, right? Every new piece of the puzzle, from the tiniest thing to the biggest breakthrough, it all adds up to this richer, deeper understanding of life itself. Exactly. And as we wrap up our deep dive here into the philosophy behind experimental biology, I hope it leaves you with a sense of wonder, about this unseen world that scientists are constantly exploring, questioning, revealing.
Absolutely. It's been a wild ride exploring not just what biology is, but the how and the why. We talked about the philosophy, the ideas underneath it all, reductionism, scientific realism.
Right, right.
And we even went back in time to see those ideas come to life through some big discoveries.
It's been a pleasure diving into all this with you.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has really got your brains buzzing. Remember, learning is a journey, not a destination. There's always something new to uncover, even in something as ordinary as a fruit fly. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and as always, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.